Hey, what's up guys? This is Anthony from Anthony's Customs, and for this video, we're going to be reviewing the Justice League movie. So this movie is one that I was very much looking forward to. I was very hopeful. I think we were all hopeful, not expectant, that this was going to be a good movie. And I looked up on Rotten Tomatoes a couple of days ago before I went to see the movie what the general consensus was. I didn't really read the reviews, I just looked at the numbers, and the critics' reviews were just panning the movie completely like terrible bad movie. And then the user reviews or the viewer reviews were fairly high, like in the 80s. So like 35 and then like 85, roughly, something like that when I looked, which is almost as opposite as it can be. Polar opposite review. So I was kind of curious. I kind of had the hunch that critics were going to find anything they could wrong with the movie and just flambe it. Anything that's wrong is just a huge problem, and it's gonna kill the movie for critics. I had that guess. That seems to be the case. Now, it seems to me that most of the users are probably along the same lines of thinking that I am, in that the movie does have a whole lot of problems, and we're going to talk about them, don't get me wrong, but it's still a big step in the right direction. For a film in a franchise that's just kind of sinking, they kind of just totally killed it with their plan overall. Like, they didn't set it up like the Marvel Universe did, and I only compare them in that it's a formula for success. You build up your individual characters, then you group them up, and it's gonna succeed almost no matter what. In this case, they didn't really build up anybody, and definitely not successfully, except for arguably Wonder Woman and kind of Batman. But even then, Batman was in a lousy movie, and Wonder Woman's movie was pretty good, but if it wasn't Wonder Woman, and if it wasn't being compared to terrible other DC movies, how would it have fared? I don't know. So my point is, they almost had no success to springboard into this team-up movie. And so that's very hard to succeed, and a lot of that problematic scenario is just carried through this movie. But like I said, there are good things, and it does make a turn, and it's kind of like a soft reboot for going forward, so that's a very good thing. It's definitely a lot brighter. It's not all doom and gloom. Everything isn't gray and black, so that's a nice step in the right direction. We have a little bit more dialogue for the characters that's a little bit more realistic in some cases, so that's good. It's not all just a bunch of really deep, somber, one-liner type things, so that's good. We do still have a lot of problems, though. So let's go ahead and dive into the meat of this review. I am going to point out, I'm not going to spoil any major things, but there's almost nothing to spoil in this movie. If you saw the trailers, you know who the villain is. And if you know anything at all about DC Comics, you know that Superman's fate from the last movie is not permanent. So I'm going to be talking about the bad guy, and I'm going to be talking about Superman's fate. If you don't know anything about those things and you want to avoid any kind of spoiler, then go away now and come back after you see the movie. But otherwise, I'm going to be talking about those things going forward, so consider yourself warned. Okay, so the first thing we should talk about is the plot. What's the plot of this movie? How are they going to bring the Justice League together, and what kind of problem do they have to solve? Well, there's not much of a plot really at all, other than Batman thinks some bad stuff's going to happen, so he has to build the Justice League, which we already saw in BVS. So it's kind of just a continuation of that, and then we have Steppenwolf, and he just kind of shows up. He's like, hey, I'm going to take over your world, only I'm not really going to take it over, I'm going to destroy it so that it's kind of like my home world, and then it'll be mine. Like, that's like the most generic plot ever. Essentially, I'm going to destroy everything, and I'm a bad guy. And that's basically the plot. There's nothing else other than we need to stop said bad guy. That's a problem. Most of these movies, Marvel and DC, have both... They've proven that you really need a good villain. And this movie does not do that well at all. It's not a good villain. It's just... It's almost the same thing as Hela in Thor. And that is, it's a really almost all-powerful villain who just wants to destroy stuff and isn't really on screen too much and doesn't really have any personality or character or anything like that. And the bad guys, and the good guys just need to figure out some way to stop them. There's no depth and no development, and that's what this was. And we'll talk about the CGI in a separate section, so don't worry, we'll get to the CGI for Steppenwolf. So that's the plot, definitely weak, and there's really no development for the building of the Justice League. It's just, let's go get Flash. We already saw that in the commercial. It was almost the exact same thing as we saw in the trailers. There was very little else to that. let's go get Aquaman. Again, very little else to that other than what we already saw in the trailers. So, and then Cyborg, there was a little bit to him, I guess, because he's kind of been, well, they didn't even really talk about him. He's just kind of more involved in this because they kind of said he was, but there's still really not much development. And it's a big problem because we don't have any standalone movies to develop these characters. We only have one for Superman and kind of or a half and a half for Batman and Superman, which doesn't really help that much. And then we have Wonder Woman. So the two most developed characters in this movie are Batman and Wonder Woman. And they kind of carry the show along. They do all of the main work in terms of exposition and that kind of stuff. So I don't know. It's like two people out of the entire Justice League are really characters we're invested in, and that hurts the franchise. It hurts the movie, and it makes it kind of hard to get behind the other characters. We'll get to that when we talk about the characters, though. So let's talk about the writing. Was it any good? I think mostly yes, with the exception of The Flash, and we'll get to that when we talk about the characters as well. I think mostly the writing was okay, but very, very basic. There was, like I said, no real detail to anything. It was just like, this is happening because this happened because that happened. Like, that's it. Don't explain why, don't explain who, don't explain what. Just, he wants that, he's doing that, let's stop him. We don't know anything. We don't know where Steppenwolf came from. We don't know about these mother box things that they're talking about other than the tiniest bit of explanation we get from Wonder Woman, a little bit from Aquaman, but not really. It's just like it doesn't do a good job of tying everything together and do any real world building. And I think that's the result of WB saying make the movie less than 2 hours long. And it is. It's short and it feels like it needs about another half hour to 45 minutes of exposition, more explanation as to why things are happening, who's doing them, that kind of stuff. It's a whole lot of, we're at point A, we need to get to point B, so they're there next scene. That's it. That's it. And I don't just mean physically transporting them, which does happen sometimes. They just go from one place to the other with 2 snaps, apparently. But storytelling-wise, too, it's like, that happened, now that happened. That's it. It's not great. Okay, so let's talk about the cast briefly, because there's not a whole lot new here, despite there being new characters. Those characters don't have a whole lot to talk about. So we'll start with Batman. How is Batman in this movie? He's basically more of the same from the last movie, except he's a little bit less angry and a little bit more sarcastic, which I think is fine. I've had some people tell me that they don't like the few quips that Batman made that were comical. I thought they fit the character just fine. There's like 2 things, and they weren't like belly buster jokes or anything. They were just like Batman being sarcastic-y. Like, you could tell he's a good guy, but he's not a happy guy in general. So he's kind of like trying to relate to these other characters, and I think that's a good way for them to show that. Is like, he's not trying to be an asshole the whole time. He's trying to work with these people, even though he is generally not a people person. And I think that came across wonderfully, and I think Ben Affleck did a fantastic job. I stand by what I said. He is the best Batman, bar none, by far, for live action. You can't beat him. He was pretty much perfect as Batman and Bruce Wayne. I can't wait to see more, although I guess there's rumors that he's not going to do anymore, but I hope that doesn't happen. But he was fantastic. And then we have to talk about Wonder Woman. Pretty much more of the same. She's fantastic as that character. She's just fine. Perfect. No problem at all. She's charismatic. She does a good job in the action scenes. She seems powerful. She's just everything you expect Wonder Woman to be. No problems at all. Superman is in the movie. Like I said, we're going to talk about that. He's more of the same, other than some really bad writing around how he comes about being in this movie. Very, very, very bad writing. Both in arguments that they had talking about it, and then between Batman and Wonder Woman, and then when he's actually on screen, why is that the way it is? I don't want to talk about it specifically, but he comes back in a certain state of mind, and it doesn't really line up with anything. So it doesn't, and they don't explain why, and he's missing clothes all of a sudden. It was just weird. It was just weird. It had some great action, but very strange. So Superman's the same as Superman. He does smile in this movie, so that's good. Like, he's happy Superman, generally speaking, so that's a good thing. He does have like a really good couple of fight scenes, so that's good. But yeah, it's more of the same Superman. Everybody likes that Superman, so I think that's okay. As for Aquaman, like I said earlier, it's pretty much just what we saw in the trailers. There's really not much of him in the movie at all that wasn't in the trailers. Like, including action and storytelling and everything, it was pretty much just the trailers. But Jason Momoa did a really good job. I liked him as the character. I didn't have any complaints, other than it would be nice if we had some character development, which they couldn't pack into this movie, so that's a problem. Cyborg. I don't like the fact that they relegated Cyborg to not doing much of anything in this movie. In a couple of the scenes, he did a little bit of action, but mostly he either was sitting down or standing still. That's a bummer. I think the actor did a good job playing the role. He had the right attitude, and it just kind of fit. But I don't like the way they relegated him to not really doing anything. They kind of made him the tech support of the team. Yes, he's strong and can fly and stuff, but he doesn't really utilize that too much. It didn't feel, I don't know, it just felt empty. And I guess that's, again, a problem of not being able to develop the character properly. And then lastly, we have Flash, which I don't mind the look. I don't mind the fact that the lightning's blue. I mean, that's such an irrelevant thing. It's not like his lightning is iconically yellow. I mean, on his suit it is, but who cares what kind of sparks come out of him? Electricity is generally blue looking, isn't it? I thought it was. Maybe it's not. I don't know. It didn't bother me. The suit doesn't bother me. His scenes, I think, were really good. The action scenes, they didn't fall back on that cliched Quicksilver from X-Men type of everything stops and he does funny stuff. No, they didn't do that at all. I mean, like, there was one scene where he was moving really fast and almost everything stopped. We saw it in the trailer, and he pushes the sword back into Diana's hand. That was really the only one of those kind of scenes. His other action scenes were really well handled, I think. One in particular that involves Superman, not... I don't want to spoil any specifics. So there's one particular fight where Flash is fighting Superman, and well, it's really well done. I don't want to talk about any more than that, but it was really well done. Very, very cool. So I like that, but the personality they wrote into Flash this time was just absolutely wrong. It's so wrong. It's not even close to what it should be, and it really hurts the character. If we didn't already know he existed, I think it'd be okay, but since we do, Barry Allen is a character, and I'm not even talking about the CW show, I'm talking about just in general, this is not that Barry Allen at all. And I don't think it's the actor's fault, I think it's the writer's fault. So maybe they can kind of change that. We'll see, hopefully. Steppenwolf I can't really talk about because he's just a CGI bad guy that doesn't have really much screen time and is nothing to talk about. Doesn't really do anything but swing an axe around a little bit. That's about it. Okay, so for the action, obviously we need to have some action, and this movie doesn't have a ton. It's got enough, I think, but it definitely could use more by a lot. Each character does have a few of their own scenes. I think Batman starts off just doing Batman stuff, which is fine, but it's only one fairly brief scene, but it's still really well done, and it shows that this could be a really good Batman going forward. And then throughout, Batman just does the best he can to help fighting an all-powerful villain. I think that's fine. They did a good job having him kind of like come up with the plan and do some things that he can do, but he's still just a human in a suit. And they did a good job of kind of incorporating all of that. So I'm happy with that. As far as Wonder Woman goes, she's definitely the powerhouse when Superman's not around, and that worked out nicely. All of her action was really good, especially once we got to the more memorable fights. Not memorable. None of it's really memorable, I should point that out. It's fairly generic overall, but her fights against the Parademons and against Steppenwolf, they're all pretty good. Like, she does a really good job, and they're good scenes. Her intro scene, though, where she's fighting some terrorist people, I felt that was just really campy. I'm curious what you guys thought about her super speed and bullet deflection. I don't like the way that was handled at all, but that's not a big deal. So moving on. Aquaman scenes, like I said, it was basically just what we saw in the trailers, and it was good, but definitely could use more. But it is Aquaman, so he's kind of limited. He's really strong, but if you don't have him in water, he loses a lot of his mojo. So yeah, I really liked him as it was. But could they have done better? Maybe, because he is really strong, so he could have maybe done a little more, but it was fine. Like, I don't have any complaints. I just wouldn't have minded a little bit more. It's kind of the same thing for Cyborg also. He was fine, but he definitely needed more of a role in terms of the action sequences. It was just not, he was mostly a non-player. And then Flash had some really cool action scenes. I really liked that. Not as much, again, as I would have liked. They really didn't focus on the new characters because they didn't want to spend time away from their main characters, I guess. I don't know. It was kind of... A couple of his scenes were fantastic, and the rest was just fine. So, I don't know. It was fine. It was okay. It was okay. And then Superman. Superman's in it, like I said, and he does have a couple of great scenes, but that's about it. It's kind of like the scene of Darth Vader at the end of that last movie. You know, it's awesome. It's probably the best we've ever seen the character, but it's over like that. So he does do a little bit of awesomeness, but that's it. He's not in the movie that much, but that's how they wrote it, so that's how we have to judge it. So that's definitely a bit of an issue. But then again, that's an issue for Superman because he's basically all powerful. He's like God tier powerful. So they can't just put him at... I don't know how they're going to handle this going forward with the Justice League, because Superman's just too strong. They're going to have to make cheesy writing cliches in order to keep him out of just destroying every bad guy constantly. They're going to have to do something to let the other guys do stuff. I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. But he was fine in this movie, and the action scenes he was in were very good. So that's okay. Next thing we need to talk about, or I guess the last thing we need to talk about, are the special effects. Definitely a ton of CGI. This was not a surprise to me. Half the scenes were probably 100% CGI, which is okay when it's done well, and most of them were, but a lot of the things that you're going to focus on are really bad CGI. I don't know where they spent that $300 million, because CGI was not good. The two primary things that don't look good are Cyborg and Steppenwolf. Sometimes Cyborg looks okay. Mostly when he's wearing his hoodie and you can only see part of his face, it looks okay. When you can see his whole body, it looks super not real. It doesn't look like it's there. Like, we know that in the Iron Man movies, most of Iron Man's not really there either. But it looks like it is. This does not. Most of the time it looks like CGI, so that's a bummer. And then Steppenwolf, 100% CGI, including the face, and you just can't animate a human face, I mean, he's mostly human looking, and make it look right. It looks fake, and it did. It was a stark contrast to the real people, and it just didn't look good. His body looked good. The parademons mostly looked good, but when they did the close-ups on his face when he was talking, it just looked super corny. Super corny, not good. Took me out of it every time they showed his face. I was like, yeah, am I playing a video game? Which I like video games, but not in my movies. So it wasn't great. Definitely not awesome. Then the last thing I want to mention for CGI is at one scene, a lot of you guys have probably heard this, that they had to have Superman come back, or Henry Cavill come back to film a scene. And he'd already grown a mustache for the next movie he's doing. So he couldn't shave it off, so they had to CGI his mouth area. And it looks atrocious. It doesn't look anything like what it's supposed to. It's terrible. The CGI was not good overall in this movie, which is surprising, because it should have been better. So, final thoughts. Lots of problems. A general lack of information, a general lack of urgency throughout the movie, and a general lack of character development, and a general lack of a villain. It's a lot of things wrong with this movie that just keep it from being really good. What is there is acceptable. It's fine. It's definitely a step in the right direction. I really enjoyed most of it, but it should have been so much better and could have easily been so much better. So I find myself, I agree that the problems the critics are pointing out are there, but I don't think it's to the degree that they're complaining about them. And I think that it is mostly pretty good, like the users or the viewers or the fans are saying. I'd give it probably like a C+ if I had to give it a rating. It's fine. It's enjoyable to watch. You should go see it. But don't get too excited. Don't expect too much. It's just kind of like an origin story for these characters, kind of. So that's it. Yeah, it's fine. It's good enough. That's a good way of putting it. So there you go, guys. Thanks for watching. Let's talk about it in the comment section below. If you saw the movie, please don't spoil it for other people without putting a spoiler warning before you type out your spoiler. And that'll do it, guys. So thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I have new videos up every single day. We talk about action figures, movies, and TV shows, and video games, and all kinds of fun stuff. So make sure you come back for that. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. And in the meantime, keep collecting.